Africa is a vast frontier of unexplored natural resources. We know, of course, that there are thousands of oil and gas blocks under license throughout the continent. But we haven't even considered the enormous areas of land and water that are still under dispute. Out of 100 boundaries covered under the law of the sea in Africa, only a third of them are agreed. Resolving these conflicts creates enormous opportunities for countries that are willing to overcome their differences. If African governments can come to the negotiating table, they will find solutions to unlock a new wealth of natural resources, such as establishing joint development areas where all sides of a border can benefit. Resolving political disputes will help us to know the continent's true resource potential. But does Africa have the right policies in place to get oil and gas out of the ground? Investors say not really. There is still a huge disconnect between policy and economic reality. So creating a clear, consistent, and fair regulatory framework is the first step needed to create a favorable investment environment. According to PricewaterhouseCoopers, 82% of oil and gas investors in Africa consider an uncertain regulatory framework one of the biggest obstacles to industry development. Government understanding of regulatory frameworks and difficulties in regulating local content and skills development have been cited as barriers to growth. Policy reform is not just critical to oil and gas investment, it is imperative for the power sector. Electricity consumption and economic development are closely linked. In fact, countries with electrification rates of less than 80% of the population consistently suffer from reduced GDP per capita. Which is why energy policies that give more consideration to security of energy supply, affordability, and expanding electricity access for all are so important. Luckily, there's a resource that can do all those things. In sub-Saharan Africa, natural gas is abundant in supply, affordable, and accessible. The big question is whether countries are willing to forego large export revenues and reserve some of that gas for local use. The answer is yes. Countries like Nigeria, Mozambique, and Tanzania have already set out energy policies that reduce LNG exports in favor of domestic gas production. So what does the future look like? Well, by 2040, gas could account for 25% of Africa's electricity output, up from 17% today. Other game changers could include regional integration through power pools and promoting electricity generation from renewables. According to McKinsey, regional power integration could save countries more than $40 billion in overall capital spending, while adopting renewables could lead to a 27% reduction in CO2 output. In 25 years, sub-Saharan Africa will consume as much electricity as India and Latin America combined did in 2010. Meeting demand will be as much about policy as it is about dollars and cents.